In today's lesson, we'll be studying surface area. Surface area is the total area of the faces and curved surfaces of a solid. We look at surface area when we talk about things like painting the walls of a room or when we look at wrapping a present. Surface area is given in 2 dimensions, such as inches squared or square meters. Because we're talking about surfaces, we're talking about the flat surfaces. It's not a 3-dimensional thing, even though we're finding the surface area of a 3-dimensional figure. First, let's look at rectangular prisms. We know that a rectangular prism has 6 faces. The top and bottom are congruent, or the same size, the back and front are congruent, and the left and right are congruent. Now let's be clear. If we look at the rectangular prism up top, we see that our left end would be congruent with our right end because those are parallel or opposite faces. However, if we were to rotate this rectangular prism, those 2 faces would still be congruent. It doesn't matter the orientation or how we're holding the figure. When we say top and bottom, we just mean in the way that the figure is actually printed. In order to find the surface area of this rectangular prism, I need to figure out the area of the blue face, of the red face, and of the face that I haven't added a color to yet, which is in our front and in our back. And we want 2 of each of those because we have 2 congruent blue faces, 2 congruent red faces, and 2 congruent black faces. The formula that we generally see is surface area equals 2 times the length times the width plus 2 times the height times the width plus 2 times the length times the height. And this is on your reference sheet. Basically, we're taking 2 of each of the different sizes of faces. Now, sometimes you'll have a rectangular prism where more than 2 of the faces are congruent, such as a cube, but this formula will work for all rectangular prisms. You might find it helpful to label your length, width, and height. It doesn't matter which is your length, which is your width, and which is your height, as long as you're consistent through all of your calculations. So I labeled my length, width, and height above, and I will substitute in my numbers, or I would if there were numbers, to find the surface area of this rectangular prism. Let's try example number 10 together. So I'm going to label the 12 as my length, the 8 as my width, and the 7 as my height. As always, I copy down the formula because I always want to substitute in the numbers that I'm using. So I have 2 times 12 times 8 plus 2 times 7 times 8 plus 2 times 12 times 7. It was helpful that I labeled my length, width, and height, but I should always double check to make sure that I have every combination of those 3 numbers. So I have the product of 12 and 8, the product of 12 and 7, and the product of 7 and 8, so that I make sure that I found both the front side, the left and right side, and the top and bottom. And I get 472. So my surface area is 472 centimeters squared, because that's the surface of all 6 of my faces. Now let's move down. We'll skip example 11 and you can try it on your own. And we'll look at the cylinder. If you think about a cylinder is made up of 2 circular bases and 1 lateral surface that's actually a rectangle when you unravel it. Picture a wrapper on a can of soup or something like that, and when we peel it off, we know that we end up getting a big rectangle. Now, the height of that rectangle is just the height of our can, but as we peel that wrapper around and around, that ends up being the circumference of our can, which also happens to be the length of the rectangle. In other words, the area of that lateral surface, or the surface going around, not including the circular bases, is our height of our can times our circumference, which is 2 times pi times the radius, or the height of the can times pi times the diameter, because those are our 2 circumference formulas. Then we also have 2 circular bases, and the area of a base is pi radius squared. However, we have 2 bases, So altogether, our surface area formula is 2 times pi radius squared, or 2 times the circular base, plus 2 times pi times the radius times the height, or the circumference times the height of the can, to give us that large rectangle. So let's do example 12 together. In order to find just the lateral surface area, we're going to do 2 times pi times the radius times our height. So we have 2 times 3.14 times our radius of 12 times our height of 25. And this gives us 1,884. So again, that was our circumference times our height. Now we want to find the bases. So we have two bases, so we have 2 times pi r squared, and I'm out of space, but it's okay. So we have 2 times 3.14 times 12 squared. Again, that 2 is because we have two bases, and we're finding the area of each of those two bases, and we get 904 and 32 hundredths. Now we need to add those together because we had the lateral surface plus the two bases, and we get 2,788 and 32 hundredths millimeters squared. So we've looked at a cylinder and we've looked at a rectangular prism, but now let's look at a triangular prism to represent all other prisms. Remember that this prism has two triangular bases, and then it has rectangular sides. I've highlighted around this triangular base to show you that if I take this net apart so that we see it as a net, we end up with two triangles that we could find the area of, and then our rectangle has one dimension that's the height of the original prism, and the other dimension that's equal to the perimeter of one of our triangular bases, or either of the triangular bases. So just like the cylinder, where we saw that the rectangle was the height of the cylinder times the circumference, we find that the lateral surface area of any prism is actually the height of the prism times the perimeter of one of the bases. So if we were to find the surface area of this prism, we would need to add the area of our two congruent bases plus this lateral surface area. So, our formula is that the surface area for any prism is the lateral surface area, which is actually the perimeter of the base, times the height of this prism, plus 2 times the area of the base. This isn't on your formula sheet because it's not really a formula, but that's the concept of what we're looking for, and you can use what you know about different two-dimensional and three-dimensional shapes to find this. Try the rest of the problems. Don't forget that anytime you can, use one of the formulas and then substitute in the numbers you know and solve for the unknowns. Some of the problems are not actually looking for the whole surface area, so make sure you read the questions carefully.